I would argue we're still, in the possibility that this could still end up happening, but at least as of literally this week, it has been deemed not valid and not moving forward. So we're thankful because this is a stunning move to try to take a constitutional amendment, jam it into 8 months, and then try to convince the public that what they did 5 years ago was a bad idea.
Outstanding is a production of The Washington Stand, your source for news and commentary from a biblical worldview.
Welcome. This is the Outstanding Podcast. On this show, we dive into the news and culture from a Christian perspective. Have you seen what's going on in Virginia? It's out of control, really. Banning private schools, possibly? Third trimester abortions, that could really happen. What about very strict gun laws in a southern state? Or redistricting so that entire state turns blue? There's actually a lot more than that. What's going on here? Well, last year, Democrats swept the elections. And now we're getting a taste of what post-Trump far-left liberalism could look like in the U.S. Now, before you say, I don't live in Virginia, Casey, I do, but maybe you don't. What is happening in Virginia now could really be the playbook for what we could see in the rest of the nation. Midterms are later this year, in fact. Now we have Jared Bridges of the Washington Stand here with me, and we're going to interview a great guest today, Victoria Cobb. She's president of the Family Foundation of Virginia, which is the largest and oldest pro-family advocacy organization in Virginia. Welcome, Virginia.
So glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I just put together that you're named for your state. That's great. It's
no,
prophetic.
Everyone calls me Virginia. I'm Victoria, but
Victoria,
everybody gets
I don't
it
know why I
wrong
said
all
that.
the time. So do not worry.
You get called Virginia. Okay, so I'm not the first
all
to
the
commit
time.
that sin.
Almost to the point where I answer to it.
There you go. Wow. Okay. Well, we have so many things. I hinted at a few of the things that we have here. I mean, Jared knows a lot about gun policy, but that's just one of the many things that's going on in Virginia. And I want to actually start with what to me is the most startling thing, and it's this constitutional amendment on abortion. Now, you're really an expert on this and more than I am, but the way that I read this constitutional amendment, and by the way, a lot of the media reporting is very disingenuous and dishonest, which we can also talk about. But the way I read this allows for third trimester abortions. And for our 21-year-old men, third trimester is, 7 months, 8 months pregnant, right? So can you talk about that? Am I misreading it? Can that really be that way?
Yeah, I think the important thing that people need to begin to understand, if you're from another state, you might not be aware, but unfortunately, Virginia is already a very permissive place on the issue of abortion. We already allow far too many abortions in our Commonwealth to begin with. And we do technically now allow abortion up until the last month, but we, in our current law, at least require that 3 doctors would make a determination that this is for the life of the mother, that this is a matter of the child would not live, or that it's irreversible harm done to somebody physically. When this amendment is introduced, what it has in it, if the people were to accept it at the ballot box, is it would allow abortion up until the moment of birth for any reason. The reason I say any reason is because it is going to be okay as a matter of mental health, which we know is a very, very wide umbrella term. And more than that, it's no longer going to be something that you're discussing and getting consult from 3 doctors. It is a single individual that makes that determination. And that individual is the abortionist himself, who stands to profit something like $5,000 a procedure. And that's who's going to decide whether it's good for you to get a final last moment abortion.
So the doctor, who's legally required, the one doctor legally required to approve the abortion is not an OBGYN. It's just an abortionist.
Correct.
Got it.
So
and
really,
up to the
we
moment,
put this entirely in the hands of the industry.
Yeah, and the financial motive is a really interesting point there. The incentives are off. It seems like incentives are off. So up to the moment of birth for mental health. So let's say you are under this new Virginia constitutional amendment that's being proposed. If a woman is 8 months pregnant, scheduled to give birth next week, and she's having strong anxiety about the birth, she can have an abortion because of that.
Well, this is the thing. And, the gentleman may not understand these things, but us ladies who have had children know that hormones go crazy in pregnancy. That's a reality. And fear is reasonable in pregnancy. You're about to change your entire life when a child enters the world. And so the idea that your emotional state could be a determinant at these very last weeks when we've already had this child been developing for 9 months in some cases. It's just devastating, and it's really poor public policy, even for those who may not value human life the way you or I do. The idea that we would think this is a great moment for a woman to make a life or death decision, and also one that is scary for her own health. Some people don't realize how dangerous late-term abortion is, but it is not. It's actually safer to just deliver the baby than it would be to go forward with a late-term abortion. So it's devastating that this is the way we're moving in our public policy.
Well, and it hits on a theme that the left has been doing for a while in some of their worst policy proposals, which is conflating basically physical violence or physical danger with mental health. You saw this, rampant in the transgender debate, which is the argument was you have to use the correct pronouns, for instance, and it should be legally mandated that you use the quote unquote correct or their preferred pronoun, because if you don't, you're doing harm to them. And you say, well, what harm? Well, you're harming their mental health. And in their worldview, you equate mental health with, physical pain. And then you could say, well, it's actually violence. You just follow the logic down. It's actually violence to use the wrong pronoun, and therefore it could be punished by the law. And that's sort of the same. I think a lot of these bad policies are conflating these two. What do you think about that?
Oh, I don't think there's any question that we have so blurred the line between true violence and words, and between actual harm and feelings getting hurt, that we really can't make our way through public policy anymore, because you have to understand these definitions to create good decision making around laws. And I would just have to add, as you're talking about pronouns, that this amendment was given to us by people who don't know what a woman is, because this entire amendment gives reproductive rights to any individual. It doesn't. It isn't a women's rights amendment. It is actually an amendment that flows with rights to the individual. Guess what? Men are individuals too, and I'm very curious to see how these reproductive rights flow for the men.
Right, the pregnant individual. Yeah, I'm going to read this just so people think that we're not summarizing unfairly what's going here. This is the text of the summary of the amendment as it was introduced. And it says that that in the abortion will be allowed in the third trimester when in the professional judgment of a physician is medically indicated to protect the life or physical or mental health of the, as you said, pregnant individual.
Yes.
So it's mental health is protected. So you could take the. I'm going to have a question for you in just a second, Jared. I'm going on a roll here, but the mental health thing when you want to assume good faith on the hands of the women, the abortionists, you might say, well, if they're really upset, it's even a hard case to make. Then, if they're really depressed or they're really anxious, they should be able to abort a baby at 8 months. I really don't see that argument. But what it really does is for the people who aren't acting in good faith, anyone who wants an abortion, the doctor says, well, are you? Fill out this mental health survey, and if you check, that you're feeling having bad thoughts, then you can get an abortion. It just creates like a back door for anyone who wants to have an abortion ever, regardless of any other restrictions, right?
Yeah, and I think people need to know, too, that the amendment brings forward this basically a situation where doctors are going to be unaccountable. There's an entire section of the amendment that is about shielding doctors from liability. And so it just is very alarming that the amendment removes safety standards, which is a little bit earlier in the amendment than the part that you read, and then allows abortion up until the moment of birth and takes off the accountability of doctors. It is an industry-driven bill that even if someone isn't pro-life like I am, they don't really respect the unborn child, respecting women ought to demand that something is better than what this amendment is. So it's total disregard for human life and total disregard for really patient protections.
Yeah, well, that's very interesting. Jared, I mentioned at the top of this that what we're seeing here could be a playbook nationally. We have midterm elections coming up. We are getting dangerously close to a post-Trump Republican Party and America. He's in a second term. We're a few years out, and
if he doesn't go for a third,
yeah, I'm not on Trump 2028 team personally. And even if the Republican wins, there's a lot of questions about what the post-Trump Republican Party looks like and what the post-Trump Democratic Party looks like. And I think both are going through sort of a rebirth. But what we've seen, we have the benefit of seeing a window because of this off-year election in Virginia. Do you think that things like this and some of the other things we've hinted at are going to get into, is it fair to say this is a new Democratic Party?
Oh, I certainly think so. And it's not not necessarily new, but it's been there. It's just been waiting. And I think what we're going to see, kind of like we did with when President Trump comes in, the George Bush Republicans, when he came in, there wasn't a whole lot of just sweeping changes made. They would stop doing some of the things that like the Clinton administration would do. They would reverse a few things, but not a whole lot of sweeping changes. Trump comes in 2016, makes some pretty sweeping changes. Then you see a little bit of backlash when Biden comes in, and then now Trump, even more sweeping changes. So I think this is the kind of, and now in Virginia, you have a Republican administration, and in at least one Republican House, then it's all flipped to Democrats, and now you're seeing sweeping changes across the board. So and it's just like that. I mean, there's really more to it. There's a lot of preparation that goes into it. But once in power, I think we'll see whichever party's in power, they're going to take the reins of power. They're not going to just hold back at all. And let's do some soft changes. I think now we're seeing they've got the broom out, and that's the playbook.
Yeah, setting aside the radical nature just of the new policies, you're right. There's whiplash, there's instability, and I was reading today, it's Proverbs 28, today is the 28th when we're recording this, and so I was reading Proverbs 28, and in verse 2 it says, "When a land transgresses, it has many rulers, but with a man of understanding and knowledge, its stability will long continue." And obviously it's kind of interesting to try to map that onto a democracy where you have elections every 2 years. But a general feeling of instability is a reflection, not just of instability in our society, but that there are multiple worldviews going on here. And there's a large percentage of Americans who believe the Bible, believe in traditional morality, traditional Western values, the things that made our country great. And then there's a section of the country that lives based on hedonism and wants to do whatever is right in their own eyes. It feels right at the time. And then, I mean, we were all guilty of this, but then you kind of apply moral language to whatever you kind of sense in your own intuition is right. Victoria, please interrupt my sermonizing here.
Oh, I don't think there's any question. And the point that you're making, unfortunately, Virginia is not like California, where it's just steadily been bluer and a few more people get added to the mix. What happens when it flips is there's this moment of, we don't know how long we'll have this, so we need to remake the entire Commonwealth. And that's very different than states that have kind of been blue over a period of time. And so they come in with very radical ideas. In fact, we've seen even where there have been slightly more moderate, if that's even really a word, Democrats, we've seen them be primaried out in our last couple of elections. And so if there's anything other than an extreme agenda, that party has been ruthlessly kind of removing some of those people. So even though you might find, your neighbor's a Democrat and you agree on some things, it's very hard to get into elected office in Virginia if you're not extreme, because of just the way politics works in the party. And so we are getting, I think one commentator said something like, Abigail Spanberger, our new governor, had barely sat down for a cup of coffee before we get the Communist Manifesto. And that feels real right now. The bills are things that most places haven't even seen introduced. And that's speaking of states that are very blue. They just kind of come in and run ramshot. There's even a bill that literally says everything that the Youngkin administration did in the education department, just undo that, roll it back and go back to when it was Governor Northam. Like literally just like in a stroke of a pen, like undo all of that and let's start there. You don't typically see Republicans do that, as he was making the point about the Bush administration.
Yeah, it's funny because that's what Youngkin won the election on, actually, was his education reforms and his push on education. The one thing that got him across the finish line, they're trying to undo that. Let me ask you about some of these other bills. We can't go into depth on every one of them, but I want to give people an idea. If this really is a Democratic playbook, something that could be expected, let's say if 3 years from now, Democrats have control, White House, Senate, and the House. What are they going to do with that? Well, I think, based on this idea that Virginia could be the premise, I know there's something going on with same-sex marriage. I know they're doing something with private schools that you guys have been working on. I don't know, there's gerrymandering. Is there gambling legislation? Right now, all the gambling is across in Maryland, thankfully. It's terrible for people. Tell us about some of these.
Yeah, I mean, I'll start with the private school bill because I think that's one of the most dramatic. And to date, we have not heard of it ever being introduced in any other state. But what they have done in their aggressive reaction to President Trump and the fact that there is some educational relief coming in the form of the big, beautiful bill where people get some tax credits if they donate to scholarships and people can then go to private schools. They're trying to react to that. And what they've done is created a bill that says if any private school takes any singular student with any kind of public funds, and that is bigger. Right now, it is written way bigger than even just getting this federal, tax credit at some point, the scholarships that are produced from that. It actually affects our state scholarship program. And actually, there's a whole bunch of other vehicles that could cause this to come into play. But if any school takes any student that is brought in directly or indirectly with public funds, then they would have to administer to the entire school our state standards. They're called SOLs in Virginia. Every state has something, but that's what ours are called. And ours are curriculum based. So if you have to administer the standards, you have to teach the curriculum. So literally you have to administer it. And if you don't pass, so you can't just say, well, I'll give them the test, but it doesn't really matter for us. If you don't pass, you can't enroll students afterwards. So literally all enrollment stops and in 5 years, your school is essentially shut down. So this is the reality that we're talking about is that they will change every component. And then when it talks about, when you get to the point where there's some religious schools that accept these scholarship kids, we get extra burdens. So all schools will have a new level of non-discrimination. So you will have to accept kids whether or not they comply with your faith, whether or not they hold your standards of biblical sexuality or they're gender confused or any of those things. All schools will have to admit them. And you have to provide an opt-out for religious instruction or worship. So all of a sudden, a Christian school, many of whom actually inculcate, they actually bring in aspects, infiltrate is what I'm trying to say, every aspect of their curriculum with faith. They're supposed to provide an opt-out to a child. So again, when we talk about this eliminating private schools, this is the reality of what the bill really would do, is that you can't be a private school other than paying extra tuition. I don't know what would make you the kind of school that you are today under these new regulations. So really trying to wipe out private education in Virginia.
I can't think of another state that has such an aggressive stance. Is there one?
We have not heard of any.
Wow. I mean, that's a malicious takeover of all private schools and just turning them into maybe not public in their practice, but they are public in their practice, the curriculum, and don't they have to? You would have to. Christian schools would have to affirm the preferred gender identity as well under this rule, right?
Yes, absolutely, because you'd have to accept students in total in a non-discrimination clause. And again, I mean, technically this applies to only if you take a scholarship child of some form, but the definition is so wide, almost every school, as it's written today, would be impacted, and you'd have to stop taking all sorts of children. So essentially what they're doing is, again, either shutting down private schools or making it almost impossible for anybody that is not super high income to just straight up pay the tuition.
That's what I was going to say, is it's really punishing the poor, because some of these private schools will survive, but the ones that want to, we all know the stereotype of rich kids go to private school. I mean, that's not like, we're not inventing that here, but a lot of these schools actually do, unbeknownst to maybe the general public, take in a lot of kids that can't afford it or offer them reduced rates, or they have, like for instance, a lot of pastors' kids the pastors can't afford to send their kids to the school, but they give them a scholarship or reduced rate, or they have an outreach where they take in maybe troubled kids and they integrate them into the more healthy community, and it helps those kids a lot. But basically, they would be unable to help people out, and private schools would truly which are generally better than public schools, by the way. It's not like Virginia public schools are just flourishing so well that that kids will be better off not going to the private school. It's just going to be punishing the poorer kids.
And there's two segments that I didn't really bring out that are really important. One of the public funds that end up sending kids to private school in Virginia is actually kids with special needs. There are children for whom the public school absolutely does not work. And the public school literally acknowledges, we're not succeeding with this child. We're going to allow them on state dollars to head over to a private school that might be specializing in whatever the issue might be. So that also is impacted. And then you think about schools that are modeled like classical schools. There are schools that are literally modeled where their curriculum is so uniquely different from the way a normal school functions. They would cease to be a classical school if they attempted to take the SOLs. So this is, a comprehensive bill. And yet we think about the irony of the candidates that ran in this election, particularly our governor candidate, who's now our Governor Spanberger, was all about being the affordability candidate. So the irony is not lost on most people following this, that this would make things that are currently affordable to some families by way of supplementing with public dollars, private education, would no longer be affordable.
All right, so we got aborting babies at 8 or 9 months. We've got banning private school. Jared, can you top that? Tell us what's going on with the guns in Virginia.
Yeah, well, if what Victoria's been sharing isn't sweeping enough, and guns are just one. There's a whole slew of things. But with the Second Amendment, there are. I've lost count of how many bills coming in for on that touch on gun control in some ways, but I'll just share a few of the most egregious. The one that everyone's talking about is the assault weapons ban, which that's talking about like an AR-15. They'll let you still keep your AR-15 or any other scary looking gun
assault weapon is not a real thing, right? It's
right.
just it's a term made up.
It's how you use the weapon, right? But there are you won't be able to transfer or sell that weapon, so you can't give it to your child, you can't sell it if you need money or
even an inheritance, you can't.
No, there's no transfer of it as I read it. But also you can't. They've added to this, and they grandfathered magazines in before that, but then now they've taken that out. So in a magazine, sometimes people call them clips, but they're magazines, the things that hold the ammunition.
Yeah.
They're calling anything over 10 rounds a high capacity magazine. So like if you have an AR-15, the standard magazine is 30 rounds, right? If you have a Glock 19, which is the most common pistol in America that people have, if you bought a Glock 19 in the last 20 years, it comes with a 15 round magazines. That's what's standard.
And the point there is this is a handgun. This is not just going after the scarier looking rifles.
And it's the most common handgun in America. And so if you have magazines that are over 10 rounds, you will be potentially in violation, a misdemeanor for you.
For every gun, for every one you have.
Those aren't grandfathered in, for everyone you have. So there will be thousands of people on July. If this goes through as it stands, that we're talking about today, then thousands of people, tens of thousands of people, probably will be in violation July 1st when that comes in.
Wow. For owning a handgun, I just want to make that point again. For owning a handgun, not this is not some narrowly tailored thing to AR-15s or something. Right. This is a very broad. Yeah.
And they've put there's an 11% tax on ammunition and purchase of firearms. That's of course adding taxes, but probably the most egregious of all is the permit to purchase is a firearm. So they're requiring anyone that purchases a firearm to have basically a license. You have to go take a class within 2 years, and then you have to. The license is good for 5 years. So, it could take you months. So, say you have a problem. I know someone who had a bear getting into their chicken coop, and they.
Jared lives in Virginia.
If you need
there's
to go
Northern Virginia, and then there's bear in the chicken coop.
If
Virginia.
You need to go get purchase a firearm to take care of that or to protect yourself, right?
Sure.
It could take you months to get the license, to take the class. You have to pay for the class. You have to pay for the license, and just think about this. This is a First Amendment or a Second Amendment right. Think of just putting a license necessity on any other of the Bill of Rights. So your freedom of religion. If you wanted to go practice your faith when you go to church, you had to take a class from the government and pay for the class, then pay for a license to go do that. So now, a lot of these things may be unconstitutional, but they're doing them anyway. And who wants to trust the courts? So that's the state of where things are.
So
and I think the gun issue has to be coupled with some of the things they're doing on crime. When you talk about the purpose of guns is self-protection, they have a bill that reduces the mandatory minimums for things like rape.
Yeah.
So we're literally reducing criminal punishment.
Penalties, yeah.
And they have things like getting rid of qualified immunity. When you get rid of qualified immunity, that's the idea that police officers can make those split-second decisions, do the best they can, and they have sort of, I think of it as insurance. It's like you're not going to be held personally, like your entire livelihood and family, if something goes wrong. Well, they're trying to get rid of that so that everyone is, as a police officer, is personally liable for everything that goes wrong in a tough situation. Now, again, this is not to say police officers are perfect and they're perfect scenarios, but it is to say you remove that. Guess what happens? The police force ducks out. You find out that a lot of people stop being police officers. So we're going to reduce crime, reduce the number of police officers, and oh, by the way, we're going to take away your guns. That's the scenario they're putting together in Virginia.
Well, how about, is it really the peak of the Me Too movement that 2026 Virginia Democrats want to reduce the mandatory minimum for rape?
I just don't understand how we've
the
gotten
final
to this
stage,
place.
the culmination of all the protests and hashtags, and that's where the party landed.
Who campaigns on that?
Yeah.
I can assure you they did not. And that's part of what Virginians are finding out, is that what they talked about in the campaign was affordability, and they're handing us everything else. And the exact opposite of affordability in the tax hikes, because we haven't talked about that. So tremendous tax hikes on the table.
Talk about that, please.
They're trying to do a number of things, but when you think about day-to-day things, one of the most egregious taxes is that they're going to be taxing every delivery that hits your door. So for my favorite Amazon users, I won't admit how often I happen to see a package land on my doorstep, but all of those will be taxed. Your groceries being delivered, all of that gets an extra tax. Then some of the things that are services that some of us might use, so maybe this gets you a little above the lower class, but things like your gym membership, your laundry, dry cleaning, those kind of things, all of those services are getting taxed. And then they're going to add, this overall 3.8 tax on your investments. So people who have done well, have earned funds, have done the wise thing in socking them away. So instead of, spending it all and ending up on government dependency, these are people who have decided we're going to be smart about our funds. And what we're going to do is now tax that investment so that we actually have to take from our investment to pay for our investment. That's the reality of what they're doing under the guise of the commercials that they ran, which were all about affordability.
Wow. Taxing gym memberships. I've walked around Richmond, and that may not be the best idea. But I guess the lawmakers, some of them, I think they don't use them too often, if I
yeah,
could
it's
be so
probably
bold.
not there. But don't worry about the lawmakers. They're giving themselves a massive salary increase, and they've taken off the cap. So you can, a local government can put housing, like a grant for an employee to get a house. And that's to attract, like you would in a contract for any employee trying to get them to move there. They've removed the cap. So it's no longer you can give a $25,000 grant. You can pay whatever you want to pay for a government official's house, also straight out of tax dollars. So don't worry about them. It's going to be us with the gym memberships and those of us that have to save for our houses that are going to be the ones that are hurt.
Well, do they have a gym in the Capitol?
That's a great question. I don't think so.
Victoria, you need to get on this. Or The Stand, we need a race to this story.
I don't recall seeing a gym in the Capitol, but that's because we were putting pressure on them when they were redoing the Capitol to stop being extravagant.
Yeah.
They wanted to have all sorts of tunnel systems to avoid people and all sorts of things. We were working hard to kind of at least not let it get too extreme.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. Jerry mentioned earlier the courts, and we're kind of drawing to a close here, but we haven't got to one of the biggest things that is being pushed now in Virginia, and this is not exclusive to the Democrats, by the way, but is gerrymandering, redrawing the congressional boundary lines. In some cases, I saw that they would redraw it where it would be only one Republican in the entire state of Virginia, which, I mean, I live in Virginia. I know all the listeners don't, but Virginia is not California. It's not, and actually California is not as liberal as some people think, but it's not a far, far, far blue state. So the idea that they could redraw it where there's only one Republican, I know the courts are doing something on that. Can you update us?
Yes. So they've put forward, and so the way it works in Virginia now, as of 5 years ago, our populace decided we're going to have nonpartisan redistricting, which everybody knows is probably kind of a little bit of a false label because it's almost impossible to have truly nonpartisan. But we have a commission that's supposed to draw the lines, and that was voted in by the people into our Constitution really at about a 2/3 rate, so like 60% And what they're trying to do is pass a change to our Constitution that says, no, just kidding. Let's halt that. And if other people are doing things with redistricting, then we get to play around with it ourselves. And so they've been trying to, and they really in process illegally put forward the wrong process. They didn't follow the correct process to put forward this idea that we're going to change our Constitution. And they wanted to rush it really fast so that they could actually impact this upcoming set of midterms. Changing our Constitution is a 2-year process. That's the problem. They really tried to rush it into a 8-month window. And by doing so, it got taken to court. But yes, they want to change it from, right now we're 11 congressional districts. 6 of them are Democrat, 5 of them are Republican. And they have vowed that their new maps would be 10-1. And so thankfully, just hot off the press, the courts, the Tazewell Circuit Court actually said this was an unconstitutional, that they could not actually move forward with this. Now, no doubt it will be appealed. So I would argue we're still, in the possibility that this could still end up happening. But at least as of literally this week, it has been deemed not valid and not moving forward. So we're thankful because this is a stunning move to try to take a constitutional amendment, jam it into 8 months, and then try to convince the public that what they did 5 years ago was a bad idea.
Okay, so that's good to know. And it brings up another point of all these different proposals we've been talking about are not necessarily at the same stage in their progression. So, for instance, the abortion constitutional amendment, which would allow an anxious woman to kill her baby the day before her due date, that one has to be voted on by the
headed
public.
To the ballot.
Okay, so the Congress did everything. This November, it's really up to Virginia voters to vote in just a popular vote if that stands or falls, right?
Yes, correct.
Okay, and then go ahead.
And there's one other amendment that we didn't mention that people should just know about, which is on the issue of marriage. You mentioned it. They are also removing traditional marriage out of our Constitution, but they're adding to it that any 2 individuals of any sex, gender can get married. Well, when you do that, you also insert, if the sex and the gender can be different, you've just inserted trans ideology into our Constitution. That one is also through the legislature and on its way to the people. We will vote on it in November for sure. And then there's redistricting, which is right now, temporarily, we hope permanently, struck down by a court and maybe stopped in its tracks.
And then all the stuff with the guns and reducing mandatory minimums, that's all legislation, right? But it hasn't been fully passed?
Correct. So all of those other things we've been talking about, pretty much everything else is midstream. We're right in the middle of our legislature, and that we have about 2 months of a legislature. So, that'll wrap up sort of early March, and we'll know what the outcomes of those bills are.
And what about gambling?
Yeah, they are constantly trying to increase gambling.
Well, they can get rich off of it. That's one.
Yes, exactly. Anything that is a vice that our government can tax, they're all for right now. And so you have a big proposal for a new additional casino in Northern Virginia. That's the hot one that is really being debated quite a bit. And then skill games are constantly debated in Virginia. Those are those things that you see in like a 7-Eleven. I don't want to name it convenience store because I don't know which ones have them and which ones don't, but you see them in convenience stores.
Yeah, you do.
And it's just like a slot machine basically, but they call them skilled games, and they are currently illegal but still sitting in many
Yeah, when I see the people sitting at those games, they always look really happy and fulfilled in life. I hope we need more of those. Yeah.
It's supposed to not be turned on, but it's truly tragic because it brings, for people who are addicted, you don't need that in your neighborhood. At least if you have a casino, you have to go to it. It's really tragic for people that find themselves constantly hoping for something that's not going to help them. And so, yes. And then marijuana, the big other last vice that they're trying to tax. They want to regulate marijuana. Right now in Virginia, it is decriminalized in small amounts, but you actually can't, there's not pot shops on every corner. And so what they are likely to do is pass a piece of legislation that allows for the commercialization. So you would see the pot shops everywhere. And they right now do not even have a local opt-out. So like a community that wants to say, we don't want them in our community. Right now, that is not in the bill. So.
Okay, so we got pot shop is opening across the street. Casino is going to be a mile down the road. And then when you go to your local gas station, you might have a skill game in there and some sad person sitting and just they're spending their life away. And then, but if you want to go to the gym, you're going to have to fork up the cash. This is the new era of liberal politics post-Trump. Have we diagnosed it rightly, Jared? Victoria?
I think we've done well, but I do think we should say that the king is still on his throne because when you put it all together, it feels very pessimistic.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think we have to, I'm not afraid to criticize either party. And I think that why we're speaking so forthrightly about this is I think when you just expose things, they lose a lot of power. And people are busy, and I try to move through these quickly. People have a lot of things going on. They can't listen to, 3-hour podcasts on each of these topics in 1 week. I mean, so we're going through this, exposing what's going on, not just for people who live in Virginia, but for what it could mean for the rest of the nation, because I think it's really giving us a window in because of the off-year election.
25 years ago, Virginia was solid red.
Solid red, yeah. And there's a reason. If you don't live here, you don't know. There's a reason a lot of people would rather live in Virginia than Maryland. But Victoria, final word for you.
Well, I just want to remind people there was a day when Florida, we were, worried about hanging chads and which way it was going to go. And now it's, blazing red. And so I just want to give hope out there. And I want people to know that we have a tough situation. We're battling it. We encourage people to be active about it. And yes, it matters in every state because states learn from each other. They react to each other. And unfortunately, they impact each other. So yeah, we just encourage people to realize that we are not without hope and we will get our Commonwealth back.
Yeah. And for me, it's not as much about red and blue, but anyone who's pushing third trimester abortion, more gambling, more abortion, higher taxes. It's going to be hard for me to be excited about that.
Yeah, it's not good for the people, right?
No, we've done a lot of podcasts and reporting about gambling and the effect it has, particularly on young men, and it's totally devastating. It's not just a normal, regular old vice like drinking soda or something. It's totally devastating for communities and for young men, and it's not a good thing. And if you cared about the people you're supposed to be serving, you wouldn't do it. Nobody wants their kid. That's the real test of all policies. Do you want your kid to be doing the things that you're allowing? And of course, the answer is no. So we'll leave it there. Thank you so much, Jared. Thank you for Victoria, not Virginia. I'll be laying in bed thinking about that mistake, but I'm grateful. And I thought you were very astute and gave very good analysis for you. I really appreciate it.
We're glad you're there doing what you're doing at Family Foundation.
Yeah, you have such a good attitude too. So to our listeners also, thank you for watching, listening. Please like, share, subscribe. As you can tell, this is a very important message, not just for Virginia, but for the rest of the nation. So help us get it out there, and we'll see you next time. Thanks.
Outstanding is a production of The Washington Stand, your source for news and commentary from a biblical worldview. This podcast is made in the USA by producer Casey Harper, production assistant Rachel Woods, technical producers David Salkeld and Yusuf Fletcher, and executive producer Jared Bridges. Help support us by texting the word outstanding to 67742 and read more at washingtonstand.com.